Get your black ass away from that register. Officer Kevin Bryce's hand slams into Marguerite Carter's shoulder, shoving the 73-year-old woman against the checkout counter. Her reading glasses fly off her face, cracking against the tile floor. Her grocery bag tears open, oranges rolling across the linoleum, a carton of eggs shattering, yolks spreading like yellow blood. I was just paying for my groceries. Shut your mouth, Grandma. Bryce twists her arm behind her back. The pain is immediate, electric, shooting from her wrist to her shoulder like fire through dry brush. Marguerite gasps. Her arthritic joints scream in protest. She hasn't felt pain like this since her stroke 2 years ago. You people always got some excuse. Bryce's breath is hot against her ear, sour with coffee and contempt. Saw you pocket that honey. Thought nobody was watching? I'm always watching. I didn't take anything. Check my receipt. I said, shut up. He wrenches her arm higher. Something pops in her shoulder. Marguerite cries out, a sound she hasn't made in decades, not since burying her husband, not since the stroke that almost killed her. The handcuffs come out, cold metal biting into wrists that have grown thin with age. The cuffs are too tight. She feels the metal cutting into her skin, feels warm blood beginning to seep. Please, you're hurting me. Good. Bryce yanks the cuffs tighter. Maybe you'll learn your place. Around them, the Savamart has gone silent. Customers frozen in the aisles. Phones raised, recording. A child crying somewhere near the cereal. The soft hum of refrigeration units, providing the only soundtrack to this brutality. Marguerite Carter, 73 years old, survivor Jim Crow, widow, stroke survivor, church deacon, is bleeding on the floor of her neighborhood grocery store because a white cop decided she looked like a thief. But Officer Kevin Bryce has made a mistake. A catastrophic, career-ending, life-destroying mistake. Because when Marguerite finally speaks again, when she forces the words past the pain and the humiliation and the blood running down her wrists, what she says will change everything. Before you take me anywhere, her voice is quiet, steady. Despite everything, there is no fear in it. You might want to call Fort Liberty. Ask for the commanding general. Bryce laughs. Right. And why would I do that, Grandma? Marguerite looks up at him. Blood on her wrists. Tears on her cheeks. But her eyes hold something that makes Bryce's laugh die in his throat. Because he's my son. 3 stars. 30,000 soldiers. She glances at the clock on the wall. And he calls me every Sunday at 6 o'clock sharp. The clock reads 5:58 p.m. It's Sunday, officer. And you just made him very, very angry. In exactly 12 minutes, this grocery store will be surrounded by military police vehicles. Federal agents will seal the exits. The store manager will be in handcuffs. And Officer Kevin Bryce will learn that the elderly black woman he just brutalized is the mother of one of the most powerful men in the United States military. 1 sentence. That's all it took. 1 sentence to end a 15-year career. 1 sentence to expose a corruption scheme that had stolen thousands from innocent people. 1 sentence to bring down everyone who thought they were untouchable. But before I tell you how this ends, let me tell you how it began. Let me tell you about Marguerite Hayes Carter, the woman they called Miss Maggie, the woman who raised a 3-star general in a 2-room shotgun house in rural Georgia, the woman who buried a husband, survived a stroke, and still managed to smile at strangers in the grocery store, the woman who just brought down an empire, with blood still running down her wrists. Stop. If you're watching this right now, I need you to do something before we go any further. Hit that subscribe button. Right now. Don't wait, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a wake-up call. It's proof that the people they underestimate the most are often the ones with the most power. This channel, U.S. Army Hidden Tales, exists to tell the stories they don't want you to hear. The stories of warriors who don't look like warriors. The stories of justice that comes when you least expect it. If you believe these stories matter, subscribe, turn on notifications, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because this community is growing every single day, and I want to know who's here. Atlanta, Chicago, London, Lagos, Los Angeles. Wherever you are, check in. Now, Let's go back to the beginning. Back to a two-room shotgun house in rural Georgia. Back to a woman named Marguerite Hayes. Back to where this story really starts. Marguerite Louise Hayes was born on February 2nd, 1951, in a shotgun house on the outskirts of Albany, Georgia. They called them shotgun houses because you could fire a shotgun to the front door and the bullet would pass clean through every room and out the back. No hallways, no wasted space. Just one room opening into the next, like pearls on a string, in homes built for people who weren't supposed to have much. The house had no running water until Marguerite was 7. No electricity until she was 11. The outhouse was 30 yards from the back door, and in summer, the smell would drift into the kitchen and mix with the scent of her mother's cornbread. Her father, Roosevelt Hayes, worked the tobacco fields from the time he was 6 years old. His hands were like leather gloves, thick, cracked, permanently stained brown from the tarred tobacco leaves. He couldn't read. He couldn't write. But he could count every penny he'd ever earned and every penny he'd ever been cheated out of. And he'd been cheated a lot. Her mother, Erlene, took in washing from the white families in town. She'd scrub their sheets and their shirts and their children's clothes, and she'd return them pressed and perfect, and they'd pay her pennies. Sometimes they wouldn't pay at all. Put on the account. They'd say, knowing there was no account, knowing she couldn't argue, knowing she needed whatever they decided to give her. Marguerite was the fourth of 7 children. She learned early that survival meant silence, that safety meant invisibility, that the worst thing a black child in 1950s Georgia could do was draw attention. But Marguerite couldn't help drawing attention. She was smart, not just smart for her school, not just smart for her town, smart in a way that made teachers uncomfortable and white folks suspicious. She taught herself to read from a Bible and a discarded newspaper before she ever set foot in a classroom. By 3rd grade, she was helping the teacher grade papers. By 6th grade, she had read every book in the colored school's library, all 37 of them. The white kids had 300 books in their library. Marguerite knew because she counted to the window one day, standing on her tiptoes, looking at a world she wasn't allowed to enter. "You're too smart for your own good," her mother would say, not as a compliment but as a warning. In 1950s Georgia, a smart black girl was a target. A smart black girl who didn't know her place was a tragedy waiting to happen. Marguerite learned to hide her intelligence the way other children had stolen candy. She learned to hesitate before answering questions, even when she knew the answer instantly. She learned to say, "I don't know," and "I'm not sure," and maybe the teacher could explain it better. She learned to survive, but she never stopped learning. At night, by the light of a kerosene lamp, she'd read whatever she could find. Newspapers, magazines, the backs of cereal boxes. She absorbed words like water into dry soil. She memorized poems. She practiced penmanship until her letters looked like they belonged in books. And she dreamed. She dreamed of a life beyond the tobacco fields, beyond the washing and the ironing and the "yes, ma'am" and "no, sir." She dreamed of a world where her intelligence wouldn't be a liability, where her curiosity wouldn't be dangerous. She had no way of knowing that the world she dreamed of was still decades away, or that she would help build it, not with her own success, but by raising a son who would become one of the most powerful men in the United States military. Marguerite married young. They all did back then. His name was Thomas Jerome Carter. Tommy, a tall boy with gentle hands and a laugh that made everyone around him feel lighter. He'd served in Vietnam, 2 tours, came back with a Purple Heart and a 1,000-yard stare that would sometimes descend without warning in the middle of dinner or church or quiet evening on the porch. They never talked about Vietnam. Not once. Not ever. What they did talk about was the future, about getting out of Georgia, about building something better, about the children they would have, and the chances those children would get. Their first child was a daughter. They named her Erlene after Marguerite's mother. She was born in 1972 in the same shotgun house where Marguerite had been born. The same house with no hallways, no wasted space, no room for dreams. Their second child came 3 years later. A boy. They named him Thomas Jerome Carter, Jr. But from the moment he opened his eyes, eyes that seemed to take in everything, miss nothing. Marguerite called him something else. She called him General. "That boy is going to be something," Tommy would say, watching 3-year-old Jerome line up his toy soldiers with military precision. "Look at him, organizing everything. Got a plan for every toy in that box." "He's going to be a general," Marguerite would reply. "Mark my words." It wasn't a prediction. It wasn't a hope. The way she said it, it was a fact. A truth that simply hadn't happened yet. And she set about making it happen. Every night, she read to him. Not children's books. They couldn't afford those. She read him newspapers, history books from the library, military histories that she'd special ordered through a librarian who'd taken an interest in the bright woman with the worn hands and the hungry mind. She read him about Hannibal crossing the Alps, about the Tuskegee Airmen, about Colin Powell, who became the first black 4-star general in Army history just a few years before Jerome was born. "You see that?" she'd say, pointing at Powell's picture in a magazine. "He came from nothing, just like you, and look where he is now. That can be you, baby. That will be you." Jerome believed her. How could he not? His mother had never lied to him, never made a promise she didn't keep, never told him the world would be easy, but always told him he was capable of conquering it. By the time Jerome was 10, he knew more military history than most adults. He could name every major battle of World War II. He could explain the tactics of Gettysburg. He could diagram the D-Day invasion. By the time he was 12, his father was dead. Tommy Carter died on a Tuesday afternoon in 1987. Heart attack. Massive. Instant. He was 41 years old. Marguerite was 36, with 2 children, no savings, no insurance, and no husband. She buried him in the cemetery behind the Baptist church where they'd been married. She wore the same dress she'd worn to their wedding, the only nice dress she owned, and she stood at the graveside with her hands folded and her eyes dry, because she knew her children were watching and she would not let them see her break. That night, after the children were asleep, she went out to the porch and she wept. She wept until she couldn't breathe. She wept for Tommy, for herself, for the future she didn't know how to face. And then she stopped. She dried her eyes. She went back inside. She checked on her children. And she made a decision. She would not let this destroy them. She would not let poverty or grief or the 1,000 obstacles stacked against her steal her children's future. Whatever it took, however hard it was, she would get them out. And she did. Marguerite took 3 jobs. From 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, she worked at a commercial laundry, feeding sheets into industrial machines that ran so hot they'd give her burns she hid under long sleeves. From 3 until 7, she cleaned offices downtown. Lawyers' offices, doctors' offices, the kind of places where people left half-eaten lunches and loose change and sometimes crumpled bills in the trash that she never touched, no matter how badly she needed the money. From 8 until midnight, she worked the assembly line at a plant that made automotive parts, standing in one place for 4 hours, performing the same motion thousands of times, until her shoulders seized and her hands cramped and her feet swelled so badly she'd have to cut her shoes to get them off. She slept 4 hours a night, sometimes 3, but every morning she was up before the children, breakfast on the table, lunches packed, uniforms pressed, and a prayer, always a prayer, before they walked out the door. "Lord, protect my babies today. Guide their steps. Open doors for them that no man can shut. And help me make it through one more day." The children never knew how close they came to losing everything. How many nights Marguerite sat at the kitchen table, staring at bills she couldn't pay, robbing Peter to pay Paul, making impossible choices between electricity and food, between medicine and rent. She never told them. She never complained. She never let them see her cry. All they saw was a mother who was always there, always strong, always certain that tomorrow would be better than today. And for Jerome, that certainty became the foundation of everything he was. "Mama believes in me," he told himself on the days when the other kids called him names. "Mama believes in me." He reminded himself when the guidance counselor told him he should consider trade school instead of college. "Mama believes in me." he whispered when the rejection letters came, when the scholarship applications went unanswered, when the world seemed determined to prove his mother wrong. She wasn't wrong. In 1993, Thomas Jerome Carter, Jr. walked across the stage at the United States Military Academy at West Point and received his commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. He was the first person in his family to graduate college, the first to become an officer, the first to wear the uniform of his country with gold bars on his shoulders and a future stretching out before him like an endless horizon. In the audience, wearing the same dress she'd worn at Tommy's funeral, because it was still the only nice dress she owned, Marguerite Hayes Carter wept. But these were different tears. These were the tears of a woman watching her prophecy come true. From a shotgun house with no running water, to the stage at West Point. From a mother who worked 3 jobs and slept 4 hours a night, to a son who would command 30,000 soldiers. This is the story of Marguerite Hayes Carter, the woman who built a general, the woman who sacrificed everything so her children could have something. And she's about to be arrested for stealing a $12 jar of honey. If this story is hitting you, if you feel what I feel right now, then you already know why this channel matters. We tell the stories that don't get told. We honor the heroes who never make the news. We shine a light on the people who sacrifice everything for their children, their families, their communities. If you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button, turn on the bell, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me, who's the person in your life who sacrificed everything for you? A mother? A father? A grandmother who worked herself to the bone so you could have a chance? Tell me their name. Let's honor them together. Now let me tell you how a 3-star general is made, and why every Sunday at 6 o'clock he calls his mama without fail. The Army tried to break Thomas Jerome Carter, Jr. That's what it does. It takes young officers and grinds them down, tests them, pushes them past every limit they thought they had. The ones who survive, the ones who emerge stronger, those are the ones who rise. Jerome survived, and then some. He went to Ranger School. 61 days of hell in the Georgia mountains and Florida swamps. Sleep deprivation, starvation, physical demands that push the human body past the point of reason. Of his class of 312 candidates, only 97 graduated. Jerome was one of them. He was also the honor graduate, the top of the class. He went to airborne school, jumped out of perfectly good airplanes, and learned to trust his equipment, his training, and his own nerve. He went to the Infantry Officer Basic Course, where he learned to lead men in combat, then the Captain's Career Course, then the Command and General Staff College, then the War College. Every course, every school, every opportunity the Army offered, he took them all, and he excelled at them all. But it wasn't just the schools that built Lieutenant General Thomas Jerome Carter. It was the deployments. Desert Storm, 1991. He was a brand new lieutenant, 22 years old, leading a platoon of 30 soldiers against the 4th largest army in the world. The ground war lasted 100 hours. His platoon didn't lose a single man. Somalia, 1993. The Battle of Mogadishu. Black Hawk Down. Jerome was a captain by then, coordinating logistics for the Quick Reaction Force that fought its way through the streets to rescue trapped soldiers. He earned his first Bronze Star in those streets. Afghanistan, 2002. The hunt for Al-Qaeda in the Tora Bora Mountains. Jerome was a major, running intelligence operations that helped identify and eliminate key enemy leadership. He came home with a second Bronze Star and a promotion to lieutenant colonel. Iraq, 2004 through 2006. The worst years of the insurgency. Lieutenant Colonel Carter led a battalion of 800 soldiers through some of the most dangerous territory in the country. He lost soldiers. He wrote letters to their families. He learned what command really meant. Not just giving orders, but bearing the weight of lives that depended on his decisions. He came home different, quieter, more certain of what mattered and what didn't. And every Sunday, without fail, he called his mother. "How you doing, Mama?" "I'm blessed, baby. I'm blessed." They'd talk for an hour, sometimes 2, about everything and nothing, about the weather in Georgia and the weather wherever he was stationed, about church gossip and neighborhood news, about his sister Erlene, who'd become a school principal in Atlanta, about the grandchildren who were growing up too fast. They never talked about the war, about the things he'd seen and done, about the ghosts that sometimes visited him in the night. But she knew. Mothers always know. And in her way, without words, she let him know that she was proud, that his father would have been proud, that everything she'd sacrificed had been worth it. In 2022, Thomas Jerome Carter pinned on his third star, Lieutenant General, the commanding general of Fort Liberty, formerly Fort Bragg, home of the 82nd Airborne Division, the Army Special Operations Command, and over 30,000 soldiers. The boy from the shotgun house, the son of a laundry worker and a Vietnam veteran, the grandson of a tobacco picker, and a woman who took in washing, 3 stars. And every Sunday, at exactly 6 o'clock, he still called his mama. Marguerite Hayes Carter was 71 years old when she had the stroke. It happened on a Wednesday morning, in the middle of watering her tomato plants. One moment she was standing. The next moment she was on the ground, unable to move the left side of her body, unable to form the words to call for help. Her neighbor found her 2 hours later. The stroke was moderate. That's what the doctors called it. Moderate, like it was a middling grade on a report card, like it hadn't stolen half her mobility, half her independence, half of everything she'd built. The rehabilitation was brutal. 6 months of learning to walk again, to speak clearly again, to do the simple things, button a shirt, hold a fork, write her name, that she'd done without thinking for 7 decades. Jerome wanted her to move in with him at Fort Liberty. He had the room. He had the resources. He had the overwhelming need to protect a woman who had given him everything. Marguerite refused. I'm not going to be a burden on you, baby. You got a war to run. I can take care of myself. They compromised. She wouldn't move on to the base, but she would move closer. Pinewood, North Carolina. A quiet little town about 45 minutes from Fort Liberty. Close enough that Jerome could visit regularly. Far enough that Marguerite could maintain her independence. The house was perfect. Small but well-maintained. 1 story, easy for her limited mobility. A yard big enough for a garden. A neighborhood full of retirees and young families who'd quickly come to know the elegant elderly black woman, who always had a kind word, and somehow always had fresh-baked cookies. They called her Miss Maggie. The kids loved her. She'd sit on her porch in the evenings, and they'd gather around while she told stories. Stories about growing up in Georgia, about her husband, Tommy, who'd been a hero in Vietnam, about her son, who was in the Army. She never mentioned his rank, never bragged, never made herself important by association. Miss Maggie, was your husband really in the war? He surely was, sweetheart. Did he ever kill anybody? That's not a question we ask, baby. But I'll tell you what, he came home. Not everybody did. And we were grateful for every single day we had with him. The adults loved her too. She remembered everyone's name. She asked about their children, their jobs, their troubles. She listened, really listened, in a way that made people feel seen and valued. She went to the Baptist church every Sunday morning, sat in the same pew, sang the hymns from memory because her eyesight wasn't what it used to be, put her $5 in the offering plate. Never more, never less, exactly what she could afford. And every Sunday evening, at exactly 6 o'clock, her phone would ring. How you doing, Mama? I'm blessed, baby. I'm blessed. Pinewood had a small downtown, a hardware store, a diner, a pharmacy, and a Savamart grocery store that had everything Marguerite needed. She went every Thursday afternoon. Same time, same routine. She'd make her list on Wednesday night, checking the weekly circular for sales. She'd walk the 3 blocks to the store. Good exercise for her rehabilitation. She'd take her time in the aisles, reading labels, comparing prices, being careful with the fixed income that had to stretch further every year. The staff knew her. The other shoppers knew her. She was a fixture, a beloved part of the community. And nobody would have believed that Miss Maggie would ever steal anything. Nobody except the new store manager. His name was Dennis Pruitt, 38 years old, regional manager material, at least in his own mind. He'd been transferred to the Pinewood Savamart 3 months ago after incidents at 2 previous locations. Corporate had buried the details. Something about customer complaints. Something about targeting. Dennis had a theory about theft. It wasn't complicated. In fact, he'd explained it to his staff during his very first meeting. You want to catch shoplifters? Watch the ones who don't belong. The ones who look like they can't afford what they're touching. The ones who take too long, read too many labels, use too many coupons. He never said the word black. He didn't have to. His loss prevention strategy was simple. Follow, harass, accuse. Most people, especially elderly people, especially minorities, would rather abandon their groceries than make a scene. They'd leave quietly, humiliated, and never come back. That was fine with Dennis. He didn't want those people in his store anyway. The complaints had started within his first week in Pinewood. Mrs. Dorothy Patterson, 67, reported being followed through every aisle by a staff member who asked 3 times if she needed help finding something. She left without buying anything. Mr. James Washington, 71, was stopped at the exit and asked to show his receipt, even though he was clearly carrying Savamart bags and had just walked through the checkout line. The door greeter apologized, but the damage was done. Mrs. Helen Brooks, 69, was accused of switching price tags on a package of chicken. When she proved she hadn't, Dennis didn't apologize. He just said, "We're watching you," and walked away. All 3 were black. All 3 were elderly. None of them filed formal complaints. What was the point? Who would believe them? But Dennis wasn't satisfied with just driving away customers. He wanted more. He wanted arrests. He wanted to be the manager who cleaned up the Pinewood store, who reduced shrinkage to 0, who proved that his methods worked. He needed a partner, someone with a badge. He found Officer Kevin Bryce at a local bar 3 weeks after arriving in Pinewood. They got to talking about the problem. The unspoken problem, the one nobody was allowed to mention anymore. About how certain people were ruining the neighborhood. About how the police weren't allowed to do their jobs anymore. About how someone needed to stand up. "I can spot them a mile away," Dennis had said on his 4th beer. The ones who were going to steal. They all look the same. Act the same. You know what I mean. Bryce knew exactly what he meant. The arrangement was simple. Dennis would identify suspicious shoppers and call the police. Bryce would respond, make the arrest, or at least intimidate the target into leaving. For each arrest that stuck, Dennis would slip Bryce $200 in cash. Off the books. Untraceable. In 3 months, they'd made 11 arrests together. All elderly. All black. All for petty accusations that rarely held up in court. But that didn't matter. The arrest was the point. The humiliation was the point. The message was the point. You don't belong here. Dennis had noticed Marguerite on his first day. She came every Thursday. Same time, same careful routine. She touched the merchandise, examined labels, compared prices. She used coupons, multiple coupons, organized coupons, the kind of extreme couponing that Dennis found personally offensive. And she was black. He'd started watching her on the security cameras. Every Thursday for 3 months. Following her progress through the aisles. Waiting for her to slip up. She never did. Not once. Every item she took, she paid for. Every coupon she used was valid. She was meticulous, careful, exactly the kind of customer any reasonable manager would appreciate. But Dennis wasn't reasonable. Dennis was hungry. He texted Bryce that Sunday morning. "Got a live one. Old black lady, comes every Thursday." Finally caught her slipping. Easy target. Bryce's response came back immediately. "Perfect. Need 1 more for my quota. Sunday work for you." She changed her day. She's here now, picking up stuff for the week. Just watched her drop a coupon in aisle 3 and keep walking. That's intent to defraud. "On my way. Save her for me." Dennis smiled at his phone. This was going to be good. Another stat for his file. Another example of his proactive loss prevention strategy. Another step toward that regional manager position he deserved. He had no idea that the woman he was about to target had a son with 3 stars on his shoulders and 30,000 soldiers at his command. He had no idea that this easy target was about to destroy everything he'd built. But he was about to find out. Officer Kevin Bryce checked his phone as he sat in the Savamart parking lot. Text from Dennis. She's in Produce now. Moving slow. Perfect target. Get in here. Bryce smiled. This was going to be easy. He typed back. On my way. She resists, we add obstruction. Double the charges, double the stats. Dennis. These old black ladies always resist. They think they're entitled to everything. Bryce. Not for long. Gonna teach her to stay in her lane. He pocketed his phone and checked himself in the rear-view mirror. 15 years on the force. 41 years old. And still stuck in this nowhere town, answering calls about shoplifting and domestic disputes while the younger guys got promoted over him. The divorce hadn't helped. Neither had the drinking. But what really stalled his career were complaints. 12 of them, filed over the years by people who didn't understand how policing worked. People who thought cops should be nice to everyone, even the criminals. Bryce knew better. You had to be hard. You had to show people who was in charge. Especially certain people. His partner pulled up next to him. Officer Destiny Williams, 26 years old, 3 years on the force. Smart, capable, and still naive enough to believe in community policing and de-escalation and all that other academy nonsense. Bryce didn't like working with her. She was too soft, too hesitant, and she had a tendency to ask questions. Uncomfortable questions about why they stopped certain people more than others, about why elderly black women kept ending up in handcuffs. But today, she'd learn. Today, she'd see how real policing was done. What's the call? Destiny asked through her open window. Shoplifting at Savamart. Elderly black female. Manager says she's been stealing for months. Destiny frowned. Elderly? How elderly? Does it matter? It might. Elderly women don't usually. Don't start, Williams. Bryce's voice hardened. These people, they think because they're old, because they're women, they can get away with anything. They think we won't touch them. They're wrong. These people. Destiny had heard Bryce use that phrase before. She knew what it meant. She'd reported it to her supervisor once, early in her partnership with Bryce. The supervisor had laughed it off. Kevin's old school. Doesn't mean anything by it. Don't be so sensitive. She'd stopped reporting after that. What was the point? They walked into the Savamart together at 5:43 p.m. Bryce's body camera was on, but he'd learned, over the years, which angles showed what he wanted shown, where to stand, when to adjust the lens, how to create a narrative that would hold up in court. Dennis Pruitt met them near the entrance, practically vibrating with excitement. She's at checkout now. Aisle 4. I've been watching her all day. She pocketed a jar of honey in aisle 3. I saw her do it. She pocketed it? Destiny asked. You saw her put it in her pocket? Dennis hesitated. Well, not exactly. But she dropped her coupon and kept walking. That's intent to steal. She was going to claim she forgot to pay. That's not how shoplifting works, Destiny said. If the merchandise is still in her cart and she's in the checkout line. Williams. Bryce cut her off. The manager called us. He says she's stealing. That's probable cause. Kevin, probable cause requires. I know what it requires. His voice dropped to a whisper, but his eyes were hard. And I'm telling you, this is a good bust. Easy stats. Don't mess this up for me. Destiny fell silent. She knew that look. She knew what happened to officers who challenged Bryce. She'd seen him destroy careers with rumors and complaints. She'd seen him turn the department against anyone who questioned his methods. She should have spoken up anyway. She knew that, but she had student loans, a mother with medical bills, a career she couldn't afford to lose. So she followed him toward the checkout line, where a 73-year-old woman was about to have her life turned upside down. And later, when the cameras were rolling and the whole world was watching, Destiny Williams would have to live with the choice she made in that moment. The choice to stay silent. The choice to look away. The choice that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The pieces are falling into place. A manager who sees thieves everywhere. A cop looking for something, anything, to break the boredom. A young officer caught between her badge and her conscience. And Miss Maggie, walking through the aisles of her neighborhood grocery store, completely unaware that she's about to become the target of something ugly, something that happens to black people in America every single day. You know what's coming. You can feel it building. That sick feeling in your stomach when you know injustice is about to happen, and you can't stop it. But here's the thing. This story has a different ending. This time, the person they targeted has something they never expected. A 3-star general who calls his mama every Sunday at 6. We're about to watch everything fall apart. And I want you here for every second of it. If you're watching this far, you're invested. You care about these stories. So take 1 second, literally 1 second, and hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Now, let's get back to the Savamart. Because Officer Bryce just walked through the doors. Marguerite was reaching for her wallet when the shadow fell across her. Don't move. She looked up. 2 police officers. The white one was already too close, his hand on his holster, like she was some kind of threat. His partner, a young black woman, stood slightly behind, her expression unreadable. Is there a problem, officer? Yeah, there's a problem. Kevin Bryce's eyes swept over her with undisguised contempt. You're the problem. I don't understand. We got a report you've been stealing merchandise. His voice was loud enough for the whole store to hear. Shoplifting. You people think you can just walk in here and take whatever you want. You people. The words hit Marguerite like a slap. She'd heard them before 1,000 times in her 73 years. On buses in Georgia. In department stores that followed her with their eyes. In a country that had never quite decided she belonged. Officer, I haven't stolen anything. I'm just buying groceries for the week. I have my list right here in my wallet. Shut up. The words weren't loud. They were quiet, controlled, and somehow worse for it. I didn't ask for your life story, Grandma. I asked you to stop moving. Dennis Pruitt materialized beside them, that smug smile spreading across his face. That's her, officer. I've been watching her for weeks. She comes in, takes what she wants, uses fake coupons. Today I saw her pocket a jar of honey in aisle 3. I didn't pocket anything. Marguerite's voice rose despite herself. The honey is right here in my cart. I was about to pay for it. See how she's getting aggressive? Pruitt shook his head. They always do this. Play the victim. Bryce stepped closer. Too close. Marguerite could smell him, coffee and sweat and something sour underneath. Here's what's going to happen, Grandma. You're going to put back whatever you stole, and you're going to get your black ass out of this store. Or we can do this the hard way. Around them, customers had stopped shopping. Phones appeared, but no one intervened. No one spoke up. They just watched, like spectators at a show they'd paid to see. I haven't stolen anything. Marguerite's voice was steady now, despite her racing heart. I've shopped at this store for 2 years. I have my receipt from last week. I have my grocery list. I have my husband's insurance card. I don't give a damn about your husband. Bryce grabbed her arm. His grip was immediate and brutal, fingers digging into flesh, twisting her arm behind her back with a sharp, violent motion. Marguerite gasped as pain exploded through her shoulder. What are you? I said, shut up. He slammed her forward. Her chest hit the checkout counter. Her reading glasses flew from her face, skittering across the floor, one lens cracking against the tile. Kevin! Destiny's voice was tight. Kevin, maybe we should. Stay out of this, Williams. Bryce wrenched Marguerite's arm higher. She felt something pop in her shoulder. Tendons stretched beyond their limit, joints screaming in protest. The pain was blinding, white-hot. Please, her voice cracked. Please, you're hurting me. Should have thought about that before you started stealing, you old bitch. The handcuffs came out. Marguerite heard them before she felt them. The metallic clink of chain, the ratcheting click of mechanism. Then cold steel bit into her wrists. Too tight, far too tight. Officer, the cuffs. He yanked them tighter. Metal dug into thin skin. She felt warmth spreading, blood, seeping from where the cuffs had cut into her wrists. You people never learn. Bryce's voice was almost conversational now, like he was discussing the weather. Think you can come into nice neighborhoods and just take things. Think the rules don't apply to you. Marguerite's grocery bag had torn open in the struggle. Oranges rolled across the floor. Eggs shattered, yolks spreading like accusation. Her jar of honey lay on its side, miraculously unbroken, the $12 jar that had started all of this. Look at this mess. Bryce shook his head. You did this. You brought this on yourself. Destiny Williams stood frozen. Her hand was on her radio, but she hadn't called for backup, hadn't intervened, hadn't done anything except watch her partner brutalize an elderly woman. Later, she would tell investigators she was afraid. Afraid of Bryce. Afraid of what he might do to her career if she spoke up. Afraid of being labeled a troublemaker, a traitor to the blue line. But in that moment, her fear made her complicit. Let's go. Bryce yanked Marguerite upright. Blood dripped from her wrists onto the floor. Time for a trip downtown. My groceries. Forget your damn groceries. He shoved her forward. She stumbled, her arthritic knees buckling. Her broken glasses left behind on the floor. Around them, phones continued recording. No one moved to help. Miss Maggie. The voice came from Ashley, the checkout girl. She was crying. Someone do something. Mind your business. Bryce snapped without looking back. Unless you want to join her. Marguerite moved through the store in a daze of pain and humiliation. Blood ran down her hands. Her shoulders screamed with every step. She could feel everyone watching, their phones, their eyes, their silence. 73 years old, church deacon, mother of a 3-star general. And she was being paraded through a grocery store like a criminal, bleeding from the wrists, while strangers recorded her humiliation for entertainment. At the door, Dennis Pruitt was waiting, that smile still on his face. Should have just cooperated, ma'am. Would have been easier for everyone. Marguerite stopped walking. She looked at Pruitt, then at Bryce, then at the crowd of onlookers with their phones raised. You have no idea what you've done. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. No idea who I am, who my family is. Bryce laughed. Let me guess. Your cousin's a lawyer? Your nephew works for the mayor? Save it, Grandma. I've heard it all. I'm sure you have. Marguerite's eyes found the clock on the wall. 5:57 p.m. But you've never heard this. She straightened her spine. Despite the blood, despite the pain, despite everything, she stood like what she was, a woman who had survived Jim Crow, who had buried a husband, who had raised a general. My son is Thomas Jerome Carter, Jr., Lieutenant General, United States Army, Commanding General of Fort Liberty, 3 stars, 30,000 soldiers. The smile faded from Bryce's face. He calls me every Sunday at 6 o'clock. Has for 30 years. She glanced at the clock again. It's 5:58. And when I don't answer, or when I answer crying, bleeding in the back of a police car, he's going to want to know why. Silence. Complete, devastating silence. And Officer Bryce, Marguerite's voice dropped to almost a whisper. My son doesn't take kindly to people who hurt his mama. The clock ticked to 5:59. And somewhere in Bryce's pocket, his radio crackled with a transmission that would change his life forever. Kevin Bryce's face cycled through several expressions in rapid succession. Disbelief, then amusement, then uncertainty, then something that looked almost like fear. Nice try, lady. His voice was harder now, trying to cover the doubt. You expect me to believe your son is a general? I don't expect you to believe anything. Marguerite's calm hadn't wavered, but that doesn't change what's true. Kevin, Destiny's voice was urgent. Maybe we should... Shut up, Williams. He grabbed Marguerite's arm. Too hard, his fingers digging in. All right, Grandma, you want to play games? Let's play. He pulled out his cuffs. And that's when the phone rang. Marguerite's phone. In her purse. Playing a ringtone she'd set years ago. The Army's official song. The Army Goes Rolling Along. Everyone heard it. the cheerful military march echoing through the silent store. "That's him," Marguerite said softly. "Right on time. He's never missed a Sunday in 30 years. Kevin's hand froze on the cuffs. "You can answer it," Marguerite offered. "Go ahead. Tell him you're about to arrest his 73-year-old mother for stealing honey. Tell him she's belligerent and uncooperative. I'm sure he'll be understanding." The phone kept ringing. Destiny stepped forward. "Ma'am, may I?" Marguerite nodded. Destiny reached into the purse, gently, respectfully, and pulled out the phone. The screen showed a contact photo, a black man in military dress uniform, 3 stars on his shoulders, standing next to an elderly woman in a floral dress. The same dress Marguerite was wearing now. "Oh my God," Destiny breathed. She answered the phone. "Ma'am? Mama?" The voice was deep, concerned, unmistakably military. "You always pick up by the second ring. Is everything okay?" Destiny cleared her throat. "Sir, this is Officer Destiny Williams, Pinewood Police Department. I'm here with your mother at the Savamart grocery store." Silence on the line. A terrible, heavy silence. Officer Williams. The voice had changed. Gone was the warmth, the concern for his mother. What remained was the voice of a man who commanded 30,000 soldiers. Cold, precise, dangerous. "Is my mother injured?" "No, sir. She's fine. There's been a misunderstanding." "Put my mother on the phone." Destiny handed the phone to Marguerite, whose eyes had filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Hey, baby." "Mama." His voice cracked just slightly. "What's happening? What misunderstanding?" "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just a little confusion at the grocery store. They think I stole some honey." "They think you what?" "It's okay, baby. It's going to be... Is there an officer nearby?" "Put them on." Marguerite held out the phone to Kevin Bryce, whose face had gone the color of spoiled milk. "My son would like to speak with you." Kevin didn't move. Couldn't move. His brain was still trying to process the possibility that he'd been about to handcuff the mother of a 3-star general. Destiny took the phone instead. "Sir, this is Officer Williams again. Officer Williams, I want you to listen very carefully." The voice of Lieutenant General Thomas Jerome Carter, Jr. filled the phone's small speaker, and somehow everyone in the store could hear it. "I am currently at Fort Liberty, approximately 47 miles from your location. In the next 90 seconds, I am going to make 3 phone calls. The first will be to the Pinewood Police Chief, who happens to be a personal friend. The second will be to the FBI field office in Charlotte, because what you described sounds like a civil rights violation under color of law. The third will be to my JAG officer, who will be very interested in whether your department regularly arrests elderly women for groceries they haven't left the store with." He paused. "After I make those calls, I am getting in my vehicle and driving to that grocery store. I expect to arrive in approximately 50 minutes. When I get there, my mother had better be unharmed, uncharged, and treated with the dignity and respect she deserves. Do I make myself absolutely clear?" Destiny's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, sir. One more thing, Officer Williams. What is the name of the officer who put his hands on my mother?" Destiny looked at Kevin, whose hand was still frozen on his cuffs. "Officer Kevin Bryce, sir." "Thank you, Officer Williams. You've been helpful. Please stay with my mother until I arrive. Do not let Officer Bryce near her again." "Yes, sir." The line went dead, and in the silence that followed, Kevin Bryce felt his entire career crumbling to dust. One phone call. That's all it took. One phone call and a 3-star general is mobilizing a federal response. One phone call and a small-town cop is watching his career flash before his eyes. One phone call and a corrupt store manager is realizing he picked the wrong target. But here's what makes me angry. Miss Maggie is the mother of a general. She has power. She has protection. She has a son who can make 3 phone calls and bring the full weight of the federal government down on anyone who threatens her. But what about all the Miss Maggies who don't have that? What about the elderly women who get accused, get arrested, get their dignity stripped away, and have no one to call? What about the ones who just put the honey back and walk out, crying, because they don't have any other choice? This channel exists for them. For every Miss Maggie who never got justice. For every story that never got told. If you believe these stories matter, share this video right now. Not later. Right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who's been treated like Miss Maggie. Share it with someone who needs to know that sometimes the bad guys lose. And subscribe if you haven't already. Because this story isn't over. The general is coming, and justice is about to be served. The next 50 minutes were the longest of Kevin Bryce's life. He'd retreated to the parking lot, unable to face the stairs inside. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. His mind kept replaying the moment, that calm, steady voice. He's my son. 3 stars. 30,000 soldiers. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a lie. Old black women didn't have sons who were generals. That wasn't how the world worked. But his computer had told a different story. Thomas Jerome Carter, Jr., Lieutenant General, United States Army, Commanding General of Fort Liberty. Real, terrifyingly real. Inside the store, Marguerite sat in a chair near the customer service desk. Someone had finally removed her handcuffs. Destiny Williams, who couldn't bear to look at the blood anymore. The metal had cut deep. The wounds would need stitches. Ashley, the checkout girl, had brought gauze and antiseptic from the first aid kit. She knelt beside Marguerite, gently cleaning the wounds, tears streaming down her young face. Miss Maggie, I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I should have... Hush, child. Marguerite's voice was calm, despite the pain. You didn't do this. Don't carry guilt that isn't yours. But Ashley did feel guilty. They all did. Every person in that store who had watched, who had recorded, who had done nothing while an elderly woman was brutalized. A paramedic arrived at 6:15 p.m. Someone had called 911 without being asked. He examined Marguerite's wrists, his face hardening as he documented the injuries. These lacerations are deep. The handcuffs were applied with excessive force. He spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. She's going to need stitches. Probably have permanent scarring. I'll be fine, Marguerite said quietly. Ma'am, with respect, you're not fine. Your shoulder may be dislocated. Your blood pressure is elevated. And these wounds, he shook his head. I've seen a lot of injuries in my job. These weren't necessary. Dennis Pruitt had locked himself in his office the moment Destiny mentioned the words 3-star general. Through the window, employees could see him pacing. Phone pressed to his ear, gesturing wildly. He was already preparing his defense, already constructing the narrative he'd tell corporate, tell the lawyers, tell anyone who would listen. She was acting suspicious. I followed protocol. The officer made a decision to arrest, not me, but the cameras had seen everything. The witnesses had seen everything. And the blood drying on the floor told its own story. The police chief arrived at 6:32 p.m. Chief Patricia Hendricks was 54 years old, a 28-year veteran of law enforcement. She'd built her career on community policing, on the idea that cops should protect everyone, not terrorize the vulnerable. When she saw Marguerite's wrists, she stopped walking. Jesus Christ. The words escaped before she could stop them. Not professional, not appropriate, but honest. Bryce did this. Yes, Chief. Destiny's voice was barely audible. I was there. I didn't stop it. Hendricks looked at her youngest officer for a long moment. Then she knelt beside Marguerite, taking one of her bandaged hands with surprising gentleness. Mrs. Carter, I am so sorry. This should never have happened. Not in my town. Not on my watch. Thank you, Chief. Marguerite's voice was steady. But sorry doesn't heal my wrists. Sorry doesn't undo what your officer said to me. Sorry doesn't give me back my dignity. Hendricks nodded slowly. You're right. So let me tell you what I'm going to do instead of being sorry. She stood up, her voice carrying through the store. Officer Bryce is suspended effective immediately. I'm initiating a full internal affairs investigation. Federal civil rights charges will be recommended, and I personally guarantee that you will have justice. Not just an apology, but accountability. I appreciate that, Chief, but I've lived 73 years in this country. I've heard a lot of promises from people in authority. Marguerite looked toward the entrance, where the setting sun was painting the parking lot gold. I'll believe in accountability when I see my son's car pull into this lot, and not a moment before. At exactly 6:53 p.m., a black sedan with government plates appeared on the horizon. The commanding general of Fort Liberty had arrived. Lieutenant General Thomas Jerome Carter, Jr., was not in uniform. He'd been at home, in civilian clothes, about to make his weekly call to his mother when everything changed. He hadn't stopped to change. Hadn't stopped for anything. He'd grabbed his keys and driven 47 miles in 41 minutes, pushing a sedan to speeds that would have gotten anyone else pulled over. He walked into the Savamart, wearing jeans and a golf shirt, but there was nothing casual about the way he moved. Nothing casual about the look in his eyes. Nothing casual about the way every single person in that store stopped what they were doing and stared. This was a man who radiated authority, the way a furnace radiates heat. You could feel it, the weight of command, the certainty of someone who had sent soldiers into combat and brought them home again, the barely contained fury of a son whose mother had been disrespected. Mama, Marguerite looked up. Her boy, her general, her prophecy come true. Hey, baby. He crossed the store in seconds, knelt beside her chair, took her hands in his. His face, the face that had commanded briefings at the Pentagon, that had delivered orders in combat zones, that had remained stoic through situations that would break most men, crumpled. Are you hurt? I'm fine, baby. I told you on the phone. Just a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. He repeated the word like it was poison. Is that what we're calling it? He stood, turning to face the assembled crowd. Which one of you is Officer Bryce? Silence. I asked a question. His voice carried without shouting. It didn't need to shout. Which one of you attempted to arrest my mother for a jar of honey she was in the process of purchasing? Chief Hendricks stepped forward. General Carter, I'm Police Chief Patricia Hendricks. Officer Bryce has been removed from the scene and... Chief Hendricks. We spoke on the phone. He shook her hand briefly. I appreciate your quick response, but I want to make something very clear. He raised his voice slightly, addressing everyone in the store. This is not over. This is not going to be swept under the rug. This is not going to be another story about an elderly black woman being mistreated with no consequences. He turned to the FBI agents. Agent Young, I want a full civil rights investigation, not just this incident. I want to know how many other customers this manager has targeted. I want to know if there's a pattern. I want to know if the store has been systematically profiling black shoppers. Already on it, sir. He turned to the Savamart regional director, who looked like he was about to pass out. And you? What's your name? Robert Chun, sir. Regional director for... Mr. Chun, I want the security footage from today preserved immediately. I want the employment records for Dennis Pruitt. And I want a full accounting of every shoplifting incident reported at this store for the past 2 years, with demographic data on the accused. Yes, sir. Of course, sir. We're cooperating fully. Savamart is committed to... I don't want your commitment. I want your compliance. General Carter's voice dropped to something quieter, more dangerous. My mother has shopped at this store for 2 years. She is a pillar of this community. She survived Jim Crow. She survived losing her husband at 41. She survived a stroke that would have killed a weaker woman. And today, she was accused of stealing honey by a manager who couldn't be bothered to check the security footage that would have shown her coupon falling out of her pocket. He stepped closer to Chun. If I find out that this is part of a pattern, if I find out that Savamart has been targeting elderly black women in this community, I will bring the full weight of the federal government down on this company. I will call press conferences. I will testify before Congress. I will make sure that every single person in America knows exactly how Savamart treats its customers. Do I make myself clear? Chin nodded frantically. Yes, sir. Absolutely clear, sir. General Carter turned back to his mother, his expression softening. Come on, Mama. Let's get you home. Wait! Marguerite's voice was firm. I'm not leaving without my groceries. The general blinked. Mama, I came here to buy groceries. I made my list. I have my coupons. And I'm not leaving here empty-handed just because some fool decided to ruin my Thursday. For the first time since he'd arrived, General Carter smiled. Yes, ma'am. He turned to the nearest employee, Ashley, the checkout girl who'd been there since the beginning. Would you please ring up my mother's groceries? I'll be paying. Sir, the store would be happy to. I'm sure it would. His voice was polite but firm. But my mother doesn't accept charity. She pays her own way. She always has. Ashley nodded, fighting back tears. Yes, sir. She began scanning the items. The bread, the milk, the canned vegetables, and the honey. When she got to the honey, she paused. Ma'am, I found your coupon. Someone turned it in. It was on the floor in aisle 3. She held up the small slip of paper. It's still valid. Marguerite looked at the coupon, the $12 jar of honey. The whole reason this nightmare had happened. Apply it, she said quietly. Ma'am, apply the coupon. Her voice was steady. I'm not a thief. I'm not taking free groceries. And I'm certainly not paying more than I have to. She looked up at her son. Your daddy taught me better than that. The total came to $43.17, including the honey with the coupon applied. General Carter paid in cash. And Marguerite Hayes Carter walked out of that store with her head held high, her groceries in her hands and her son at her side. She walked out with her groceries. After everything they put her through, after the accusation, after the humiliation, after Kevin Bryce's hand on her arm and Dennis Pruitt's smug smile, and the whole store watching her like she was a criminal, she paid for her groceries. She used her coupon, and she walked out with her head high, because Marguerite Hayes Carter is not a thief. She's not a victim. She's a woman who raised a 3-star general in a 2-room shotgun house, and she will not be broken by a store manager and a small-town cop. That's the power of dignity. That's the strength that comes from a lifetime of surviving things that should have destroyed you. And that's why I need you to be part of this community. Hit subscribe right now, because what comes next, the investigation, the consequences, the justice, that's the part you don't want to miss. And drop a comment. Tell me, have you ever been Miss Maggie? Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do just because of how you looked? Have you ever had to fight for dignity that should have been given freely? Your stories matter. Share them. Let's build something together. Now, let me tell you what the investigation uncovered. Because Dennis Pruitt wasn't just a bad manager. He was part of something much, much worse. The FBI doesn't move slowly when a 3-star general is watching. Within 72 hours, Agent Young and his team had compiled a preliminary report that would eventually grow to over 300 pages. What they found was worse than anyone expected. The first breakthrough came from Bryce's personal phone. He'd been smart enough to delete the text, but not smart enough to know that deleted messages can be recovered. The FBI's digital forensics team pulled everything. 3 years of communications with Dennis Pruitt. 3 years of coordinated targeting. 3 years of hunting. The text painted a picture of systematic cruelty. March 15th, 2:47 p.m., Bryce to Pruitt. Got a live one at the pharmacy section. Old black lady, moves slow, perfect target. March 15th, 2:52 p.m., Pruitt to Bryce. Easy pickings. These elderly types always fold under pressure. Get her. April 3rd, 11:15 a.m., Bryce to Pruitt. Need 2 more arrests this week. Captain's riding my ass about stats. Any prospects? April 3rd, 11:18 a.m., Pruitt to Bryce. Black grandma in produce. Been watching her for 20 minutes. She touched at least 10 items. Suspicious behavior. April 3rd, 11:22 a.m., Bryce to Pruitt. That's not suspicious. That's shopping. But whatever. I'll make it work. Usual fee? April 3rd, 11:23 a.m., Pruitt to Bryce. 200 cash. Small bills. After she's processed. The day of Marguerite's arrest. The texts were even more damning. 5:31 p.m., Pruitt to Bryce. She's here. The old one I told you about. Finally caught her slipping. Dropped the coupon and kept walking. That's intent to defraud. 5:32 p.m., Bryce to Pruitt. Perfect. Easy target acquired. On my way. 5:34 p.m., Bryce to Pruitt. She won't even know what hit her. These old black bitches always cry when you cuff them. Makes great body cam footage. 5:36 p.m., Pruitt to Bryce. LOL. Can't wait. I'll have your money ready. 6:14 p.m., Bryce to Pruitt. FUCK? Problem. She says her son is a general. Like, military general. She might not be lying. 6:15 p.m., Pruitt to Bryce. Bullshit. She's bluffing. They always lie. 6:16 p.m., Bryce to Pruitt. I don't think so. There's a black guy in full uniform outside. 3 stars on his shoulders. He looks pissed. 6:17 p.m., Pruitt to Bryce. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. 6:18 p.m., Bryce to Pruitt. I'm fucked. I'm so fucked. Agent Young read the text aloud to his team in the FBI field office. The room was silent when he finished. This isn't just civil rights violation, he said. This is conspiracy, racketeering, fraud. And if we dig deeper, I bet we find this goes way beyond these two. They dug deeper. Dennis Pruitt had been running a scheme across 3 Savamart locations over 4 years. The methodology was always the same. Identify vulnerable targets, elderly, minority, low income, accuse them of shoplifting, threaten arrest, and extract restitution payments in exchange for not pressing charges. Cash payments, ranging from $50 to $200, depending on how scared the victim looked. Over 4 years, Pruitt had collected an estimated $63,000 in fraudulent payments. Some of it went to cooperative police officers like Bryce. The rest went into Pruitt's pocket. But Pruitt wasn't the mastermind. He was just a soldier in a larger operation. The FBI discovered that 5 other Savamart locations across Georgia were running similar schemes. Different managers, different cops, same playbook, same targets, same exploitation of elderly black shoppers who were too scared, too ashamed, or too powerless to fight back. The investigation expanded to include 17 police officers across 4 departments. All of them had received payments for cooperation with store managers. All of them had arrest records that skewed heavily toward elderly minority defendants. The pattern was undeniable. The evidence was overwhelming. And at the center of it all, bleeding from her wrists on a Sunday evening in Pinewood, was Marguerite Hayes Carter, the woman who finally said enough. The FBI interviewed 41 victims over the following weeks. 41 elderly people who had been humiliated, threatened, and extorted. 41 people who had stayed silent because they didn't think anyone would believe them. 41 people who finally had a voice. Edna Morrison, 79. He called me a thief. Right there in front of everyone. I'd never stolen anything in my life. But I was so scared, I just paid what he asked. $60. I cried for 3 days. Charles Washington, 81. The officer put his hand on his gun, said if I didn't cooperate, things would get ugly. I have a heart condition. I thought I was going to die right there in the cereal aisle. Patricia Holmes, 70. I kept the receipt. I don't know why. Something told me to hold on to it. Proof that I paid for everything. Proof that I wasn't what they said I was. Helen Brooks, 69. The manager told me, stay in your lane, Grandma. Like I didn't have a right to shop there. Like I didn't belong in my own neighborhood store. Dorothy Patterson, 67. They followed me through every aisle, every single one. Like I was a criminal. I'm a retired schoolteacher. I've never broken a law in my life. 41 stories. 41 lives disrupted. 41 people who had carried their shame in silence until Marguerite Carter showed them they didn't have to. The class action lawsuit was filed within a month, and the reckoning was just beginning. The charges came down 6 weeks after the incident. Dennis Pruitt was arrested at his home on a Tuesday morning. The charges included wire fraud, extortion, civil rights violations under color of law, and conspiracy. The fraud charges alone carried a maximum sentence of 20 years. He posted bail. Then he violated bail by trying to contact one of the witnesses. He was rearrested and held without bond. His lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal. The U.S. Attorney's Office wasn't interested. This case was going to trial. This case was going to be public. This case was going to send a message. Kevin Bryce was arrested the same morning. The charges were similar: civil rights violation, conspiracy, extortion, 15 years on the force, and it ended with him being let out of his apartment in handcuffs. His union tried to defend him, tried to call it a misunderstanding, tried to suggest that he was just doing his job, following the store manager's lead. The union backed down when the FBI released the body camera footage. All of it. Every incident where Bryce had participated in Pruitt's scheme. Every time he'd threatened an elderly shopper. Every time he'd stood by while someone was extorted. The footage went viral. Millions of views. National news coverage. The hashtag Justice for Miss Maggie trended for 3 days. And then the other victims started telling their stories. Edna Morrison, 81 years old now, sitting in front of a news camera with tears running down her face. I thought it was just me. I thought I was the only one. I was so ashamed. Charles Washington's daughter, explaining how the stress of the accusation had affected her father's health. He was never the same after that. He was always worried, always anxious. He died thinking people saw him as a thief. Patricia Holmes, sitting in her living room, showing the reporter the receipt she kept. Proof that she'd paid for everything. Proof that she'd done nothing wrong. Proof that she'd held on to for 2 years because some part of her knew this wasn't right. I kept it, she said, holding up the faded paper. I don't know why. I just kept it. Like I knew someday someone would believe me. The stories kept coming. 6 became 12. 12 became 23. 23 became 41. 41 elderly people, almost all of them black, almost all of them living on fixed incomes, had been victimized by Dennis Pruitt and his network of corrupt cops. The class action lawsuit was filed within a month. The trial of Dennis Pruitt began on a Monday in April. The federal courthouse in Charlotte was packed. News cameras lined the street outside. Inside, every seat was filled. Victims, families, reporters, and one very distinguished spectator in the front row. General Thomas Jerome Carter, in full dress uniform, 3 stars gleaming on his shoulders. He'd taken leave to attend. Every single day of the trial, he sat in the front row, directly in Pruitt's line of sight, and he never looked away. The prosecution's case was devastating. They had the security footage. They had the financial records. They had the testimony of 41 victims. They had the body camera footage from Kevin Bryce and 2 other officers who had agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. And they had Marguerite Hayes Carter. She was the prosecution's final witness. She walked to the stand slowly, carefully. The stroke had taken some of her mobility, but none of her dignity. She wore a blue dress. Simple, elegant, the same kind of dress she'd worn her whole life. Mrs. Carter, the prosecutor began, can you tell us what happened on the afternoon of March 17th? And she did. She told them about the honey, about the coupon, about Officer Bryce's hand on her arm and Dennis Pruitt's smug smile. She told them about the fear. Yes, she admitted she had been afraid. 73 years old and she'd been afraid. Standing in a grocery store she'd shopped in for 2 years, surrounded by people who knew her and loved her, because a white man in authority had decided she was a thief. But then she told them about something else. My husband, Tommy, God rest his soul, he served in Vietnam. 2 tours. Came back with a Purple Heart and memories he never talked about. Her voice was steady. He used to tell me, Maggie, you can take everything from a person, their money, their home, their freedom, but you can't take their dignity unless they let you. She looked directly at Dennis Pruitt. You tried to take my dignity, Mr. Pruitt. You called me a thief in front of my neighbors. You had a police officer put his hands on me. You made me feel, for a moment, like I was nothing. She paused. But I didn't let you take it. And neither did any of these other folks you victimized. You thought we were easy targets. Old, black, poor. You thought no one would believe us. You thought no one would care. She turned to the jury. You were wrong. The jury was out for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Guilty on all counts. Those are the three most beautiful words in the English language when you've been waiting for justice. Dennis Pruitt was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Kevin Bryce got 8. The two other officers who cooperated got 3 years each and will never work in law enforcement again. The class action lawsuit against Savamart settled for $11.3 million. Every victim received compensation. More importantly, every victim received an apology, not a corporate form letter, but personal apologies delivered in person by Savamart's CEO. And Miss Maggie? She got something better than money. She got vindication. 73 years old, and she finally got to stand in front of the world and say, I am not a thief. I never was, and I never will be. If this story moved you, if you felt something watching justice finally get served, then I need you to do something. Share this video. Right now, share it with your mother. Share it with your grandmother. Share it with every elderly person in your life who deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Share it with the people who need to hear that sometimes the good guys win. And leave a comment telling me what justice means to you. Because this story isn't just about Miss Maggie. It's about all of us. It's about the world we're building together. Now let me tell you how this story ends. Because it doesn't end in a courtroom. It ends somewhere much more meaningful. 3 months after the trial ended, Lieutenant General Thomas Jerome Carter announced his retirement. 32 years of service. 3 stars. A career that had taken him from the dusty roads of Georgia to the corridors of the Pentagon. He had nothing left to prove and everything left to give. I've spent my whole career serving my country, he said at his retirement ceremony, with his mother sitting in the front row. Now I want to spend the rest of my life serving my community. He established the Carter Foundation for Elder Justice. The mission was simple: protect elderly people from exploitation, discrimination, and abuse. Provide legal resources for those who couldn't afford them. Train law enforcement to recognize and prevent elder targeting. And create a network of advocates who could stand up for people like Miss Maggie, people who had spent their whole lives being strong but shouldn't have to fight alone. The foundation launched with a $10 million endowment, personal funds from General Carter's savings and investments, along with donations from fellow military officers who had heard Miss Maggie's story and wanted to help. Within a year, the foundation had helped over 300 elderly people navigate legal challenges. Within 2 years, they had trained law enforcement officers in 57 departments. Within 3 years, they had successfully advocated for state legislation in North Carolina requiring enhanced protections for elderly shoppers. And every Thursday afternoon, Miss Maggie still went to the Savamart in Pinewood. Same time, same routine, same list, carefully made on Wednesday night. But now, when she walked through those doors, something was different. The staff greeted her by name. The other shoppers waved. The new manager, a young woman named Jessica who had been specifically chosen to repair the store's reputation, always stopped by to chat. And on the wall near the customer service desk, there was a plaque, the Marguerite Hayes Carter Community Corner, in honor of a woman who stood up for what was right. Below the plaque was a small seating area with comfortable chairs, a water cooler, and a bulletin board full of community resources. A place for elderly shoppers to rest. A place for them to feel welcome. A place that said, "You belong here and you are valued." Miss Maggie had donated the money for the renovation herself, from her share of the settlement. She hadn't wanted it, blood money, she called it first. But Jerome had convinced her, "Mama, you earned that money. You suffered for it. Now make it do some good." So she did. Every Thursday, after her shopping was done, she'd sit in that corner for a few minutes. Sometimes she'd chat with other elderly shoppers. Sometimes she'd just sit quietly, watching the store hum with activity, remembering what had happened here and how far they'd come. Sometimes, when no one was looking, she'd smile, not at anything in particular, just at life, at the strange, painful, beautiful journey that had brought her from a shotgun house in Georgia to this moment, from a girl who hid her intelligence to survive to a woman whose story had changed laws, from a mother who worked 3 jobs to a grandmother who was building a legacy. Her husband, Tommy, was gone. Her daughter, Aline, was thriving in Atlanta. Her son, her general, had traded his stars for something more lasting. And Marguerite Hayes Carter, at 74 years old, was finally at peace. Sunday evening, 6 o'clock. The phone rings. Hey, baby. Hey, mama. How you doing? I'm blessed, sweetheart. I'm blessed. The conversation flows the way it always has, the way it has for 30 years. They talk about the weather, about church, about the garden Jerome is trying to grow, with mixed results, about the Foundation's latest project, about Erlene's grandkids, who are growing up too fast. They don't talk about the trial anymore. Don't talk about Dennis Pruitt or Kevin Bryce or any of it. That chapter is closed. The books are balanced. Justice has been served. But sometimes, when there's a pause in conversation, Marguerite thinks about what might have been. What if she'd just put the honey back? What if she'd walked out, humiliated but free? What if she'd swallowed her pride the way she'd been taught to do, the way survival had demanded for so many years? Dennis Pruitt would still be extorting elderly shoppers. Kevin Bryce would still be threatening innocent people. 41 victims would still be living with their shame, thinking they were alone. One sentence had changed all of that. 7 words. You should call my son first, officer. Not a threat, not a boast, just a quiet statement of fact that had toppled an empire of petty cruelty. Mama? Jerome's voice breaks through her thoughts. You still there? I'm here, baby. Just thinking. About what? She smiles, though he can't see it. About how proud your daddy would be. Of you. Of what we built, of how far we came from that little shotgun house. Silence on the line. The kind of silence that holds everything, grief and joy and love and loss, all tangled together the way they always are in families that have been through enough to know what matters. He'd be proud of you too, Mama, more than anything. Oh, I don't know about that. I do. His voice is firm, certain, the voice of a general, but also the voice of a son who knows exactly who made him who he is. You're the strongest person I've ever known. You raised me. You made all of this possible. And when they came for you, you didn't back down. You stood up, just like you taught me to do. Marguerite feels tears prick at her eyes. Happy tears. Proud tears. You know what I was thinking about the other day? She says. That night after your daddy's funeral. I went out on the porch, and I cried until I couldn't breathe. And then I stopped, and I went back inside, and I decided I wasn't going to let anything stop us. I remember, Mama, I saw you come back in. I pretended to be asleep, but I saw you. You did. Yeah, and I made the same decision. Right then, I decided I was going to be someone. For you, for Daddy, for all of it. The tears are falling now. Marguerite doesn't try to stop them. You are someone, baby. You're my son. That's all you ever needed to be. I love you, Mama. I love you too, sweetheart. I love you too. The call ends the way it always does. With warmth, with connection, with the unbreakable bond between a mother and the son she raised to be a general. And somewhere in heaven, if there is such a place, Tommy Carter is smiling. His boy made it. His Maggie made it. Everything they sacrificed, everything they dreamed, everything they hoped for in that little shotgun house with no running water and no electricity and no room for dreams. It all came true, from a shotgun house in Georgia to a courtroom in Charlotte, from a mother who worked 3 jobs to a son with 3 stars, from 7 words in a grocery store to a foundation that has helped hundreds. This is the story of Marguerite Hayes Carter. But it's also the story of every mother who sacrificed everything, every parent who dreamed bigger than their circumstances, every person who refused to be broken by a world that seemed determined to break them. This is why we tell these stories. Not because they're easy, not because they're comfortable, but because they're true, and because the truth has the power to change things. If you've made it to the end of this video, you're not just a viewer, you're part of this community. You're part of something bigger than any one story. And I need you. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. Like this video to help the algorithm share it with people who need to hear it. And most importantly, comment. Tell me your story. Tell me about the person in your life who sacrificed everything. Tell me about the time you stood up when you could have stayed silent. Tell me what justice means to you, because these stories matter. Your stories matter. And together, we're building a community that believes every hidden tale deserves to be told. This is U.S. Army Hidden Tales. I'm honored you're here, and I'll see you in the next one.